The scent of stale flour and dust was suffocating inside the dark kitchen cabinet. 7-year-old Sua pressed her small face against the rough wood, trying to become invisible as her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. In her trembling hands, she clutched a smartphone, its glowing screen the only light in her cramped hiding place. The glass was spiderwebbed with cracks, mirroring the fractured safety of the home she had known for too long. Outside the thin wooden door, the sounds of her nightmare erupted, familiar and paralyzing. The heavy, uneven thuds of her stepfather's boots were followed by her mother's frantic, muffled gasps. "Minho, stop! Please, Sua is sleeping!" Her mother's voice trembled, thin and breaking. "I don't care about that kid. Where's the rest of it?" His voice roared, thick with the scent of cheap soju and desperation. "The collectors are coming tonight. If I don't have the money, we're all dead anyway." A chair scraped violently across the floor, followed by the sickening sound of porcelain shattering. Her mother let out a sharp, strangled cry that was cut short by a heavy thud against the cabinet door. Sua flinched, biting her lip so hard she tasted copper. She knew she couldn't wait. With tears blurring her vision, she opened the messaging app to the only contact she remembered, her father's old number. Her tiny, shaking fingers typed, "Please stop. He's hurting her. Help us." The darkness inside the cabinet felt like a living thing, heavy and suffocating with the scent of stale flour and the sharp tang of old wood. 7-year-old Sua pulled her knees tightly to her chest, trying to occupy as little space as possible. Every time the floorboards groaned outside, she flinched, her small frame jolting against a stack of metal mixing bowls that threatened to clatter and betray her. Just inches away, the thin wooden door was the only thing separating her from the monster in the kitchen. "Where is it, Jian? I know you tucked some away." Minho's voice was a jagged blade, cutting through the air. It was a sound Sua heard in her nightmares, thick with the slurred aggression of soju and the desperation of a man who had lost everything at the tables. "There is nothing left, Minho. That was for Sua's school books." Her mother's voice was a frantic whisper, a sound of pure terror that made Sua's eyes sting. The sound of a heavy palm striking skin echoed like a gunshot. A chair skidded across the linoleum, and a muffled thud followed as her mother hit the floor. Sua buried her face in her hands, her breath coming in shallow, jagged hitches. She wanted to scream, to run out and bite his hands, to make him stop, but she was so small, so invisible. Then she felt it in her pocket, the old, battered smartphone her mother had given her, just in case. With trembling fingers, she pulled it out. The bright glow of the screen felt like a spotlight in the dark, and she frantically tucked it under her chin to hide the light. Her vision was swimming in tears as she opened the messaging app. Her mother had told her that her real father was a hero, and though he had been gone since she was a baby, she kept his old number saved like a prayer. "He'll come. He has to come," she told herself, the lie a fragile shield against the horror outside. "I'm gonna find it," Minho growled, his footsteps heavy and rhythmic, moving toward the very cabinets where she hid. "And when I do, you'll wish you never met me." The cabinet door rattled. Sua's heart nearly stopped. In a blur of desperation, she typed with shaking thumbs, her small fingers slipping on the cracked glass. She didn't check the area code, she didn't check the digits, she just hit the contact at the top of her recents and poured her soul into the screen. "Please stop. He's hurting my mom. Please come. He's going to find me." She pressed send. The little blue bubble floated up, a tiny message sent into the vast, uncaring world. She closed her eyes tight, clutching the phone to her heart, waiting for a miracle or the end. High above the neon-soaked streets of Gangnam, the air in the private boardroom of the Gold Dragon Syndicate was thick with the scent of expensive tobacco and unspoken threats.
Jang Tae-ho sat at the head of the polished obsidian table, his face a mask of granite. Opposite him, 3 rival bosses leaned forward, their eyes darting nervously between Tae-ho's stillness and the heavy folders spread before them. The tension was a physical weight. A single wrong word would ignite a war that would burn half of Seoul. "The docks are mine," Jang Tae-ho said, his voice a low, dangerous velvet. "There is no negotiation. There is only acceptance." As just the eldest rival opened his mouth to protest, a soft, insistent buzz broke the silence. It was the sound of Tae-ho's personal phone, a device known only to a ghost-like inner circle. Tae-ho didn't flinch, but his gaze sharpened. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out the phone. The rival bosses watched, breathless, as the man known as the Iron Dragon stared at the screen. "Please stop. He's hurting my mom. Please come. He's going to find me." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Tae-ho's thumb hovered over the screen. He didn't know the number, but the raw, unadulterated terror in those words bypassed his logic and struck a chord buried deep under decades of scar tissue. He remembered a night 20 years ago, a similar plea, a similar darkness, and a help that never arrived for his own sister. His jaw tightened, a muscle leaping in his cheek. The rivals across the table exchanged confused glances. "Mr. Jang," the eldest whispered, "is there a problem with the terms?" Tae-ho didn't look up. His eyes remained fixed on the desperate message from a child he didn't know. Slowly, he stood up, the legs of his chair screeching against the marble floor like a dying animal. The sound made the other men jump. "The meeting is over," Tae-ho announced, his voice devoid of emotion, yet vibrating with a new, lethal intent. "Over?" the rival gasped. "We haven't signed the treaty. If you walk out now, the streets will—" Tae-ho leaned over the table, his shadow looming large against the panoramic windows. "If the streets bleed, they bleed. I have a more pressing debt to collect." He turned to his right-hand man, who was already standing with a coat ready. "Trace it," Tae-ho commanded, sliding the phone toward him. "I want a GPS lock, a floor plan, and the names of everyone in that building within 3 minutes." As he strode toward the door, his fingers flew across the screen, typing a reply that would change the trajectory of 3 lives. "Stop crying. I'm your dad now. Send the address. No one will ever touch you again." He didn't wait for a reply. He was already moving toward the elevators. The dragon finally awakened.
The sirens of Seoul were a distant hum compared to the roar of the 3 black sedans tearing through the narrow alleys of the Mapo district. Inside the lead car, Jang Tae-ho sat in total silence, his eyes fixed on the GPS pulse on his subordinate's tablet. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. He looked like an executioner. He checked the slide on his suppressed handgun once, a rhythmic metallic click that signaled the end of Minho's world. 30 seconds out, Vinny, his most trusted enforcer, muttered, "The target is a 3rd-floor walk-up. The man is a low-level gambler, heavily in debt to the Tigers. He's volatile, likely armed with whatever's in the kitchen." "He is a dead man," Tae-ho corrected, his voice as cold as a mountain grave. "Move silently. I want the girl and the woman secured before he even realizes the air in the room has changed." The cars pulled to a synchronized halt a block away. A dozen men in sharp black suits melted into the shadows, moving with a disciplined lethality that no street thug could hope to match. They bypassed the creaking elevator, gliding up the stairwell in a blur of shadow and steel. Outside the apartment door, the sounds of violence were peaking. A heavy thud shook the frame, followed by a woman's stifled sob. "Please, no more," she whispered. Tae-ho didn't wait. He didn't knock. At his silent nod, 2 men hit the door with a specialized ram. The frame disintegrated. The scene inside was a portrait of chaos. Min-ho, a man whose face was a map of vice and anger, was standing over a slumped Ji-yoon, his fist raised.
He spun around, blinking at the sea of black suits flooding his tiny, dilapidated living room. "Who the hell are—" Minho never finished the sentence. Vinny was on him in a heartbeat, a swift, brutal strike to the solar plexus, folding the man like paper. Two other guards pinned him to the floor, their knees buried in his spine, silencing his groans with a heavy palm over his mouth. Tejo didn't spare the gambler a second glance. His eyes scanned the room, landing on the kitchen cabinets. He walked over, his handmade Italian shoes crunching on the shards of a broken soju bottle. He knelt down in front of the small, scarred wooden door. "Sua," he said softly. The name felt strange on his tongue, yet heavy with a sudden protective weight. Sua's cabinet door creaked open an inch. A pair of wide, terrified eyes peered out, reflecting the light of a cracked phone screen. Tejo reached out a hand, palm up, steady and inviting. "I told you to send the address," he said, the corners of his mouth softening in a way his men had never seen. "I'm here now. The shadows are gone." Sua looked at the powerful man in the black suit, then at her mother being helped up by a gentle guard. With a small, broken sob, she lunged out of the darkness and into Tejo's arms. As he lifted the small girl, her head tucking into the crook of his neck, Tejo looked at the whimpering man on the floor. "Get him out of my sight and burn this place to the ground. They are never coming back." The transition from the squalor of the Mapo apartment to the Valenta-style heights of Tejo's penthouse was a silent, surreal blur. When Sua finally opened her eyes, she didn't see the cracked ceiling or the moldy corners of her old life. Instead, she found herself draped in silk sheets so soft they felt like water against her skin. The air was bathed in the golden artificial glow of Seoul's skyline, pouring in through floor-to-ceiling windows that seemed to touch the stars. Beside her, Ji-eun stirred, her breath hitching in a moment of reflexive panic. She sat up quickly, her hand flying to the bruises on her arm, only to realize she was wearing a fresh, expensive linen gown. The air here didn't smell of stale alcohol or fear. It smelled of sandalwood and rain. "Ji-eun?" Sua whispered, her voice tiny in the vastness of the suite. "I'm here, baby," Ji-eun replied, pulling the girl into her lap. They both looked toward the door as it slid open with a soft electronic chime. A woman in a crisp dark suit entered carrying a tray of steaming porridge and fresh fruit. She didn't look like a maid. She moved with the upright posture of a soldier. "Mr. Jong has requested that you eat," she said, her tone professional but not unkind. "A doctor is waiting in the lounge to check your vitals. You are safe here. This floor is restricted. No one enters without the chairman's thumbprint." Sua slipped out of bed and padded toward the window. Below, the city looked like a toy set. For the first time in her life, she felt higher than the things that scared her. She saw men in black suits patrolling the perimeter of the terrace below, their silhouettes sharp and immovable against the city lights. They weren't hiding like she used to, they were standing guard. "Is the man here?" Sua asked, turning back to the woman. "I mean, the one who answered my phone." "The chairman is in a meeting," the woman replied, "but he has left instructions. You are to have anything you ask for. He will see you when the sun rises." Ji-eun looked at the luxury surrounding them, the marble floors, the heated air, the quiet power of the guards, and felt a different kind of shiver. They had been rescued by a dragon, and while the fire of his protection kept the monsters away, she wondered what it would cost to live in his lair. But as she watched Sua pick up a piece of fruit without looking over her shoulder for a blow, Ji-eun knew she would pay any price. In this fortress of glass and steel, the nightmare had finally stopped.
The sun rose over Seoul, painting the penthouse in shades of rose and gold, but Sua still moved like a ghost. When Tejo entered the dining hall, he found her sitting at the edge of a massive velvet chair, her breakfast untouched, her small shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow from the silence itself. She spoke only in whispers, her voice so low it barely stirred the air. Taeho watched her for a long moment, the man who had ordered the silencing of 100 enemies, feeling a strange, sharp ache at the sound of a child afraid to be heard. He didn't sit at the head of the table. Instead, he pulled a chair directly beside her. "The walls here are thick, Sua," he said, his voice a low rumble that lacked its usual edge of steel. "Do you know what that means?" She shook her head slowly, her eyes fixed on the polished marble floor. "It means that in this house, the outside world cannot hear us. And more importantly," he leaned in, his shadow offering a strange sort of comfort, "it means you can be as loud as you want. You don't have to hide in cabinets anymore. You don't have to whisper." Sua looked up, her gaze flickering to the guards standing like statues at the door. "But the bad men, they listen for noise." Taeho reached out, and for the first time he placed a large, calloused hand gently on her head. "The bad men are gone, and if any new ones try to listen, they will have to go through me first. My job is to be the noise, so you don't have to be afraid of it." He picked up a silver spoon and dropped it onto the floor. The sharp clang echoed through the vaulted room, making Sua jump. The guards didn't flinch. They didn't scold. Taeho looked at her and tilted his head. "Your turn. Drop something." Sua hesitated, her fingers trembling as she touched a small piece of silverware. She let it fall. A tiny tink. "Louder," Taeho encouraged. This time she pushed a heavy ceramic mug toward the edge. It shattered with a satisfying crash. Sua gasped, waiting for the shouting, the anger, the familiar sting of a reprimand. But Taeho only smiled, a rare, genuine expression that reached his eyes. "Again," he commanded softly. By the end of the hour, the fear that had kept her lungs tight began to loosen. Taeho didn't just give her a home, he began to give her back her voice. He taught her that bravery wasn't the absence of fear, but the realization that she was finally worth defending. For the first time in 7 years, Sua didn't just breathe, she spoke at a normal volume, her voice steady as she looked at the man the world called a monster and saw only a father. The peace of the penthouse was not shattered by a scream, but the cold, rhythmic blinking of a red light on the security console. In the heart of the night, while Sua slept dreaming of silk and sunlight, the world Taeho had built for them was being watched. Minho had not disappeared into the shadows as expected. Instead, he had crawled to the only people more dangerous than the man who had humbled him. He had gone to the Iron Tiger Syndicate, offering them the one thing they craved more than money, a way to hurt Jang Taeho. The attack came at 3 a.m., not with a frontal assault, but with the chilling precision of a coordinated hit. The rival syndicate's men, led by a desperate and vengeful Minho, moved through the service entrance, cutting the primary power to the estate. Inside the darkened master suite, Jiyeon sat bolt upright. The silence of the penthouse had changed. It was no longer the heavy, safe silence of protection, but the hollow, echoing quiet of a hunt. She felt the vibration of footsteps, too many, too heavy, moving through the corridor. Panic, cold and familiar, clawed at her throat. She lunged for Sua's room, her heart screaming as she saw the silhouette of a man standing in the doorway. "Shh!" a voice commanded. It was Taeho. He stood in the center of the nursery, a shadow among shadows, holding a suppressed rifle with a terrifying, practiced ease. "Get behind me. Do not look away from my back." Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors to the suite were kicked open. Minho stepped into the moonlight, flanked by 4 men in tactical gear. His face was a map of fresh bruises and old hate, his eyes bloodshot and wide with a manic triumph. "You thought you could just take them," Minho sneered, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. "You had a chance to walk away with your life, Minho," Taeho said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more
power than the shouting. No, you are the one who brought a war into my daughter's home, and in this home I am the only god. Before Minho could pull the trigger, the room exploded into motion. Taeho didn't just defend, he dismantled. The stakes were no longer about business or territory. As Sua awoke to the sound of the man she now called father, standing between her and the ghost of her past, the revenge of a debt collector became the catalyst for a final, bloody reckoning.
The morning after the blood on the penthouse floor had been scrubbed clean, the war shifted from silenced pistols to fountain pens and thick legal vellum. Jang Tae-ho sat in a sun-drenched office that smelled of old paper and expensive leather, watching a high-powered family attorney pull a stack of documents from a briefcase. The primary document on the mahogany desk was the petition for termination of parental rights and a request for step-parent adoption. Mr. Jang, you understand that filing this name in the public registry is a declaration, the attorney whispered, his voice trembling slightly. By naming Kang Soo-ah as your daughter, you are putting her in the light. Minho is a non-entity, but the Iron Tiger Syndicate will see this as a permanent claim on the woman they believe owes them blood. You are moving from a private dispute to a public challenge of their authority. Taeho didn't hesitate. He picked up the silver pen, his hand steady, the ink flowing onto the line marked petitioner. Minho signed away his rights in a basement last night. He won't be contesting anything, Taeho said, his voice cold and final. And as for the Tigers, let them read the registry. Let them see that she no longer belongs to the shadows or to the debts of a gambler. She belongs to the House of Jang. As the ink dried, the invisible lines of the underworld began to fracture. News of the filing traveled through Seoul's dark veins faster than a police report. In smoke-filled back rooms across the city, rival bosses looked at the registry in disbelief. Tae-ho, the man who had always been a solitary fortress, had just given himself a heart, and therefore a target. Back at the estate, Soo-ah stood in the library, tracing the letters of her own name in a new workbook. She didn't understand the legal war or the way the Iron Tigers were mobilizing their soldiers in response to a piece of paper. She only knew that for the first time, when she looked at the man walking toward her, she didn't just see a protector. She saw a name that matched hers. Tae-ho knelt beside her, looking at the workbook. "From today, Soo-ah, your name is written where no one can erase it," he said softly. "Does it mean I'm yours?" she asked, her voice no longer a whisper, but a clear, bright bell. "It means I am yours," Tae-ho corrected, his eyes hard with a promise that the coming war would be the last the city would ever see. The registry was a name, but to the underworld it was a battle cry. The dragon had officially claimed his treasure, and he was ready to burn the world to keep it. The fog hung thick and heavy over the Han River, swallowing the lights of the city and turning the water into a dark, swirling abyss. The iron-scented air was broken only by the rhythmic lapping of waves against the concrete pillars of the bridge. In the center of the darkness, a single black van sat idling, its headlights cutting through the mist like the eyes of a predator. Inside, Soo-ah sat bound and gagged, her small body shaking with a terror that surpassed even the Cabinet of Shadows. The Iron Tigers had waited for the moment Tae-ho was most vulnerable, the legal transit of his daughter to her final adoption hearing, to strike. They didn't want money anymore. They wanted to see the Dragon of Seoul crawl. Suddenly, the screech of tires echoed across the asphalt. A lone black sedan tore through the mist, fishtailing to a stop 20 yards from the van. The door opened and Jang Tae-ho stepped out. He was alone, his suit jacket discarded, his white shirt stark against the gloom.
He didn't carry a weapon in his hands. He carried the cold, absolute certainty of a man who had already decided everyone else on this bridge was dead. "Let her go," Taeho said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the water with the weight of a falling mountain. "You think she is my weakness," the rival boss shouted from behind the van's door, pressing a blade toward the girl's silhouette. "You gave yourself a heart, and now we're going to cut it out." Taeho didn't stop walking. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, each one a heartbeat of impending doom. "You think she is my weakness," he said, his eyes glowing with a lethal, predatory light. "You haven't realized yet that she is the reason I no longer have any reason to hold back." As the rival gang members stepped out of the shadows, weapons raised, Taeho moved. He was a blur of violence and precision, a storm that had finally broken its banks. He didn't fight like a businessman, he fought like a father. He took a bullet to the shoulder without flinching, his focus narrowed entirely on the small girl in the van. One by one, the tigers fell into the dark water below. When Taeho finally reached the van, his hands were stained red, but his touch as he reached for Su-ah was as light as a feather. He sliced through her bonds with a single flick of a knife, pulling her into his chest as the last of his enemies vanished into the fog. On the banks of the Han River, the war for the registry was over. The dragon hadn't just protected his treasure, he had burned the bridge behind him.
The heavy, ornate doors of the Seoul family court stood tall and imposing, but for the first time in her life, Sua didn't feel small in their shadow. She was dressed in a soft, cream-colored dress, her hand tucked firmly into the large, scarred palm of Jang Tae-ho. The man who had once been a ghost in a phone screen now stood beside her in a charcoal suit, his presence a silent wall of granite that held back the world. Inside the quiet courtroom, the air was still and solemn. Ji-yoon sat to their left, her eyes bright with tears of joy that had replaced the tears of terror. The judge looked down from the bench, his expression softening as he reviewed the final decree. The Iron Tigers were a memory, their influence dismantled, and Minho's name had been struck from the records of Sua's life as if it were nothing more than a smudge of dirt. "Everything is in order," the judge announced, his voice echoing with a kindness that made Sua's heart swell. "By the power vested in me, the adoption is finalized. From this moment forward, Jang Sua is legally and irrevocably the daughter of Jang Tae-ho." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of a new beginning. Tae-ho looked down at the little girl who had reached out to a stranger in the dark and changed the course of his life. He had spent his existence building an empire of fear, only to realize that the most powerful thing he would ever own was the trust of a child. As they walked out into the bright, crisp afternoon air, the city hummed with its usual chaos, but the noise no longer felt threatening. Tae-ho stopped at the top of the stone steps, looking out at the horizon. "It's done, Sua," he said softly. "No more hiding, no more cabinets. You have a name that is yours, and a home that is yours." Sua looked up at him, the sunlight catching the gold in her eyes. The fear that had kept her voice a whisper for 7 years was gone, replaced by a crystalline certainty. She didn't hesitate. She didn't flinch. She reached up and grabbed the lapel of his jacket, pulling him down so she could whisper into his ear. "Thank you, Appa," she said, the word Dad ringing out with a clear, fearless chime. Tae-ho closed his eyes for a brief second, the word anchoring him to the earth in a way no title or territory ever could. He picked her up, settling her against his shoulder as they walked toward the waiting car. The wrong number led them to the right place. The dragon had found his heart, and the little girl had finally found a father who would never let the shadows return.